Philadelphia belongs not to the South, but not to the North either. Philadelphia belongs to the border. We don't want those abolitionists any more than we want those slave traders. White people will be supreme, working class as well as wealthy. Black people are seen and not heard. That's the border.
Just over the line between North and South, Philadelphia has erected its own borders. 29 autonomous townships and districts. An urban bedlam surrounding America's wealthiest city. Laborers, bankers, and firebrands fight for control. Whose Philadelphia will survive?
Our own Ben Franklin comes here with nothing but hard work and an idea and sets to work making a life. James Fortin, who follows him, is one of hundreds and thousands of successors, a hardworking man with an idea who builds up his own business and becomes successful.
He hired black and white into his sail-making shop. That was unheard of in late 18th century and early 19th century America.
Fortin said, I want to make the best sail possible. And so if you can do better than this person, I'm going to hire you. I don't care if you're Jewish. I don't care if you're white. I don't care if you're black. I need the best people in my business.
She's probably worth at least $100,000. And that's a lot, and I do mean a lot of money, in 1830s Philadelphia.
The 1830s marks a steep increase in slavery on Philadelphia's doorstep in the South, and with it, a surge of racism on the streets. The border city defines James Fortin only one way: as a black man.
His wife told a British visitor that even as a Fortin, they could not walk through the streets of this city without young white men and white boys chasing after them.
August 1834. James Fortin's son, Thomas, is out on an errand when he is targeted by a mob of white toughs.
Poor whites had more in common with poor blacks than they probably realized. But, because race became the driving issue, it drove a wedge between these two communities.
How free is free when you worry constantly about your children's safety, about whether or not they will be kidnapped and tortured for you to never see again?
When Thomas escapes, a neighbor overhears the mob's vow to return to the corner and finish the business.
Once a neighbor tells James Fortin is able, because of his influence, because of his money, he's able to call the mayor. He's demanding justice.
Mayor John Swift sends Philadelphia constables out to protect Thomas Fortin. The arrest of 7 men enrages whites in the city and across South Street in Moyamensing.
Along South Street, there were cheap entertainments, brothels, and a public carousel called the Flying Horses, which was popular with both working-class whites and working-class blacks.
The burning of the Flying Horses carousel is a spark that ignites the white mob to riot. And the riot doesn't stop there.
Using the remains of the carousel as weapons, for 2 nights, the mob attacks black churches and loots black businesses and homes.
They are on the hunt for any defenseless black person that they can find.
If you're a mob in 1834 at the corner of 7th and South. All you have to do is cross the street into Moyamensing Township, and you are then immune from the Philadelphia police.
White Philadelphians are able to avoid violence. So if they mark their homes by candles or lanterns, they were protected.
That racial animus could not be bought away. The only thing that could have happened to James Fortin, which could never happen to him, was for him to be able to change the color of his skin. The one thing he could not buy.
Desperate Black Philadelphians reconsider an old idea, leaving to form a colony in Africa. Organizers of the American Colonization Society urge Fortin to join.
It says, we understand that race is the central problem in America. We think we found the solution. We have some land in Africa, and all of you can go back.
But Fortin and other Black leaders see through the scheme.
James Fortin remembers hearing the Declaration of Independence read publicly for the first time.
So, go back where? I fought for this country. I suffered the hell of being in prison for this country.
Yet, some ingenious gentlemen have recently discovered that I am still an African. If I should only be set on the shore of that distant land, I should run at once to the old hut where my forefathers lived 100 years ago. James Fortin.
Only 4 blocks away from the Flying Horse Riot was the home of Nicholas Biddle, the quintessential Philadelphia blue blood, the last of the great Enlightenment men.
Biddle was descended from one of the founding generation of Pennsylvania. His forebears were, to say the least, distinguished.
Biddle is president of the Second Bank of the United States on Chestnut Street, which holds and invests the deposits of the United States Treasury. The bank is key to Biddle's grand plan to end the chaos of urban life through investment in infrastructure, manufacturing, and education.
Philadelphia had been the financial capital of the new nation. Chestnut Street was the Wall Street of the early republic.
Biddle proves to be the model central banker. If he sees credit conditions getting a little too tight, he releases money into the market. If they're a little too frothy, he kind of reins them in. The bank can literally move markets.
When he becomes president of the Second Bank of the United States, he has a building constructed of Philadelphia marble, but it's on the model of the Parthenon.
It's a temple of finance, and its philosopher king was Nicholas Biddle.
Charles Dickens comes to Philadelphia, and he looks at this building and he says, why is this bank in the form of a temple? And someone says, people build temples to the things they love.
Biddle's bank produces a city of industry. Philadelphians haul coal. They build ships. They make railroad cars, carriages, ironwork, wools, cotton, indigo dyes, steam machines, and glass. They brew beer and invent medical cures. All together, more than any other place in the nation.
In order to make money with money, you have to not only sell product, you have to keep costs down. And the most logical thing to do is to depress wages.
Philadelphia's craftsmen blame Biddle's bank for the suppression of wages, and they idolize the new U.S. president, Andrew Jackson.
Andrew Jackson comes into presidential politics as a man of the people, as a populist, just like us. Jackson is an Indian killer, very wild character, compared to the Whig elite that has established itself in Philadelphia.
Andrew Jackson is radical in his hatred and contempt for shopkeepers, for banks, for credit, which he regards as the evil machinations of money men and stock jobbers to undermine the independence of ordinary Americans like himself, Andrew Jackson.
He's not cowed by the Nicholas Biddles. He's not impressed with banks and periwigged judges.
Jackson will kill Biddle's bank. He will veto the bill to recharter it.
Andrew Jackson, being the man who never backed down from a fight, of course he vetoes it. Slowly and just doggedly, he attacks Biddle, and by extension, Philadelphia's preeminence in the financial world.
When Biddle fights back by restricting the flow of capital into the economy, he pushes the nation into a fierce depression.
But the bank war really hurts the city. Philadelphia is never going to be the banking capital of the nation again, and that honor really passes to New York.
That creates an opening for Philadelphia's white working class to grab the reins again.
Irish-born John Farrell is a handloom weaver living in Manayunk, his way of life threatened by mechanization and mass production.
The worker was very personally attached to his work. He most likely lived above his workspace. He most likely set his own hours. If he did not want to work on Saturday or Sunday, he would not. But as factories grow in scope, something is under siege at this point.
Farrell calls on exploited workers across the trades to organize.
John Farrell called Manayunk mill owners a blood-sucking aristocracy for paying men only 80 cents per day and women only 40 cents per day.
He noticed something particularly among the coal heavers along the Schuylkill River, and he had actually said to them, "Do you not recall from Ireland the way that the aristocracy there often tried to drive a wedge between us based on our religious differences?"
They're working 16, 18 hours a day. He's able to bring them all together to demand a 10-hour workday and to demand safe working conditions. We are all day laborers.
After 20,000 strikers shut down the city's economy in the summer of 1835, employers agree to a 10-hour workday, the nation's first major victory for organized labor.
It's an enormous milestone, but they still view themselves as vulnerable. White workers do not look with favor on fugitives from slavery coming into town, bringing skills.
John Farrell refuses to accept any black workers into his movement. His comrades push them out.
The country's economic well-being is now tied to capitalism and the cotton economy. People are making their fortune and losing their fortunes, and that is very much wedded to slavery.
Philadelphia is one of the most precarious cities of the North, at least for free Black Philadelphians. It butts right up against the state of Delaware, which held on to slavery until the Civil War.
You have increasingly large migration of free blacks and fugitive slaves across the Mason-Dixon line into Philadelphia.
With mercenaries roaming the street, the Fortin family shelters and assists runaway slaves.
Sarah and Fortin grew up around the table, listening to their father and talking about the movement and the work the family had done. Anti-slavery sentiment pushed out from the Fortin women. They began to direct the movement for themselves.
Charlotte Fortin and her 3 daughters, Sarah, Harriet, and Margaretta, help organize the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society.
From its origins, it's interracial, and it stays resolutely interracial.
Women from across the country join the movement. From Massachusetts, Lucretia Mott. From South Carolina, Angelina Grimke, demanding an immediate end to slavery.
But in a city like Philadelphia, where many merchants, many leading families have very close ties to the South, through business, often through marriage, abolitionists present a real threat.
A double threat. They're not only speaking out against racism, but they're women, so you're not even supposed to know how to read and write, let alone write, these powerful, moving speeches.
Not only are they wrong in what they are saying, they are wrong to be speaking in public. And they are wrong to be making common cause with African-American activists.
In 1838, Jacksonian Democrats pushed through an amendment to the Pennsylvania Constitution that strips black men of the right to vote.
To wipes African Americans out of the political community.
Black people and their allies couldn't even rent a building to have a meeting.
The Female Anti-Slavery Society has to act. They plan a national meeting in Philadelphia.
Sarah Fortin is able to raise $40,000, $1 million today, to build this Temple of Liberty, Pennsylvania Hall.
On the hall's opening day, Mayor John Swift implores them to cancel the convention. But 3,000 defiant abolitionists crowd inside.
People noticed 20 white men stepped into the entranceways in the back of the hall and started peering around and looking at the gas pipes and the gas light fixtures.
What the anti-abolitionists want is for the whole trouble to die down, people to shut up and get back to doing business.
For the white mob outside, everything about the meeting in Pennsylvania Hall was wrong and improper, and it needed to be stopped.
One of the people just called all slave owners thieves. The Hatter, standing outside, cannot believe what he hears. So he yells out that if you're saying that all slave owners are robbers, then you're saying George Washington is a robber.
An abolitionist says, well, I am calling George Washington a robber. He stole people's lives.
$15,000 Philadelphians surround Pennsylvania Hall.
The fire chief and the mayor show up to the mob and say, gee golly whiz, you really shouldn't do this, this just isn't nice. And then turn their backs and walk away.
Angelina Grimke, as she spoke, she could hear things being thrown at the hall. She could hear the anger start to rise in the audience, and she continued to speak, to say the things that had always gotten her into trouble before.
What is a mob? What if the mob should now burst in upon us, break up our meeting, and commit violence upon our persons? Would this be anything compared with what the slaves endure?
The abolitionists, women, both black and white, and this includes the Fortins, the Grimkes, Lucretia Mott, link arms together and leave the hall. This is a way of protecting the black women. Because if they had left the hall on their own and walked out through that mob, they surely would have risked death.
Fearing a lynch mob, James Fortin sneaks abolitionist leader William Lloyd Garrison out through the back door. Stevedores bust in with wooden beams they've carried from the port. Hundreds of men target the abolitionist bookstore first and build a pile of anti-slavery pamphlets in the Grand Saloon. Kindling.
They rip gas pipes from the wall and they ignite a giant bonfire.
The destruction of Pennsylvania Hall is an expression of Jacksonian democracy. This is the majority targeting an unpopular minority.
Attacked by the mob, the firemen let the fire burn.
What's really been burned and attacked is this idea that all people are equal. What must have been going through Fortin's mind, if you just put a building up and it can't last more than a week, we're not going forward. We're going backward.
The burning of Pennsylvania Hall is a direct attack on the power of democracy to solve the country's problems. And the only way this is going to be solved from here on out is war.
The abolitionists decide to let the ruin of Pennsylvania Hall stand for years as a reminder. In 1841, the Second Bank of the United States finally collapses. Nicholas Biddle is arrested and charged with fraud. James Fortin dies the next year, a rich man without political rights.
It's probably the most violent the city has ever been in its entire history, even up to today. It's at that point that Edgar Allan Poe comes to Philadelphia.
The young Poe absorbs the city's darkness as his writing takes off.
A short walk would take you into the heart of Southwark and Moyamensing, not integrated or incorporated into Philadelphia city proper. They were the vice districts.
It is open season for gangs. You've got the Flayers, the Bouncers, the Nighthawks, the Stingers, the Rats, and in Moyamensing, the Killers.
Poe stops writing so much about supernatural things, and he starts writing about everyday chaos.
May 1844. Native-born Protestants bristle with distrust for immigrant Irish Catholics whose allegiance to the Pope they call anti-American. Throughout spring and summer, Protestants go to war against Catholics in Kensington and Southwark, burning churches and orphanages, and giving gangs control of the streets. As dozens die and hundreds are injured, John Farrell escapes to Pittsburgh, his unity pact between Protestant and Catholic workers destroyed. Reformers say Philadelphia County, with its mess of small towns and districts, is ungovernable.
In the aftermath of the riots, Philadelphians begin to think about trying to create some kind of political union that will provide policing across the entire county.
The possibility exists in the minds of the city's leadership of reaching out to all of those disparate communities and bringing them in under one banner, building that whole community into one city.
And they think, what happens if we put the city together? Think about what our population will be. Think about what we can achieve. And I think consolidation is a manifesto to urban greatness.
In 1854, Harrisburg votes to enable Philadelphia County to consolidate its 29 municipalities into a single, ambitious metropolis, the first large city in the nation to unify.
Consolidation now creates the fourth largest city in the Western world, the largest city by geographic area in the nation.
It's much more than a city government. It gives the city greater power to extend streets, gas lighting, water supply out into the countryside.
Soon after consolidation, a group of abolitionists led by James Fortin's granddaughter, Charlotte, meet to launch a new campaign to end slavery.
When the white mob started forming at the back of that hall on that day, the abolitionists sent for the police with no real hope that the police would protect them. And then to their surprise, in the unified city, the mayor's police arrived and suppressed the mob and protected that political meeting.
Those barriers, those hatreds, don't disappear in the new unified city. They localize. And we become, for good and for ill, the city of neighborhoods. They work for us as long as we don't trespass.